Welcome back, everybody, and welcome in the Line Movers Network College Football Week number 3 podcast. I'm David Dorman here with the guys, Ian Robbins, Trey Edge. Guys, like football last weekend?
Some crazy results. We found out some things. I think we still got a lot of questions, but last week was definitely a great weekend of college football. I was watching the late slate of games at early night. I was like, I need some more TVs going on right now because there was some great action up and down the field.
Yeah, it was great, except that I had to suffer through, my Tar Heels in a 2 overtime sweat against Appalachian State. And I proclaimed as I left the stadium, don't ever play them again.
Better result than last year.
How soaked were you? Looked like a downpour.
It was okay during the game, but prior to, we were trapped in our car for a good hour and a half.
Yeah. Weather last weekend was something else on the East Coast.
Yep, absolutely.
All right, so make sure everyone listens to the podcast this week. We're going to break down 2 games, and then make sure you find this very same podcast next week. There are about 8 games on the slate you will not want to miss. We're going to break down 2 good ones for this week, though. We're going to start in the SEC and end in the SEC. 12 noon Eastern, ESPN. LSU, the Fighting Tigers, 1-1. Their only loss coming to Florida State. They're traveling to Starkville, Mississippi, cowbell heaven. The Bulldogs coming in at 2-0 after beating my Wildcats last weekend in overtime. LSU, Trey, 9.5-point favorites, total of 55. Let's start with the Edge.
Man, this game, when you look at it, it just has all the makings of beatdown until you look a little deeper. You look at LSU, what happened, you expected a bounce back. How much do you give a bounce back win when you throw up 72 points against Grambling? It was a get-right week against a much lesser opponent. That's an obvious thing. But when we do these and we look at these games, we have to dig deeper. And what I found fascinating in looking at this was I don't have any issue with where I lean in terms of what I think LSU is going to do this week in terms of winning. I think they're going to win the ball game. But this is a show about betting against the spread. And my first instinct was Mississippi State 2-0, LSU still favored by 9.5. And I looked at that game versus Arizona last week, your Wildcats, as you called them, David, a 31-24 win by Mississippi State in overtime. But what was interesting about that game, Arizona outgained Mississippi State by over 100 yards. Arizona had 5 turnovers. This is a different Mississippi State team. Post Mike Leach, this is a different offense. You've got the quarterback and Power who's back. But this is not an offensive juggernaut by any means. This is not what we saw with Mike Leach. And I just think when you look at what they did last week against Arizona, by all rights, really should not have won the ballgame. If you're going by stats and you're going by yardage and everything else, Arizona should have won that ballgame. And then I look at LSU getting right, and I put heavy on that front 7 for LSU that we saw them struggle a little bit against Florida State, but we know what LSU has in that front 7. Score-wise here, it's hard for me to make a play, but when that line dips below that 10, you're at 9.5 now. I like LSU there. I'm just placing more on what a strength of a team is in the front 7 and what I think Mississippi State is getting a little bump, even though they're 9.5-point dogs. I think in any real world, we'd have put that at 17 had LSU not lost that first game and Mississippi State not come in 2-0. I think there's a little bit of a fake out here with the Bulldogs and winning that game last week, and I've got to take LSU all day at -9.5.
Ian, how do you see this?
Yeah, I'm right there with you, Trey. Looking at that game last week, and David, you probably watched that game closer than probably any of us, but Arizona shouldn't have lost that game. Mississippi State had no business winning that game. It was a total lucky win, comeback win. It's just not a game that deserves. So the 2-0 record, coming home off a West Coast win, coming back home, hosting a conference game early on. You get the Cowboys getting out early. You see LSU 1-1 coming in, but it's just such a mismatch in talent to me. I was down on Mississippi State coming in this year as it was, just with Mike Leach, the tragic death of Mike Leach happening at the end of last season. Just so many unquestions. Will Rogers still there as a very solid quarterback, but just with unexpected change in leadership at that program, there's just so many questions in the SEC. I just wasn't a big fan of them coming in to replicate a lot of the success they had the last couple of years under Mike Leach. Now, great for them to be 2-0, great for them to get the win. I don't think it's going to stand up to test, especially the top teams in the SEC, especially the SEC West. LSU has one goal in mind. They had one goal in mind coming into this year. They still can maintain that goal, but they have zero margin for error. There's no margin for error, and LSU knows that. There's a lot of veterans on that team. A lot of people have been around. Their talent is just way too much. Yeah, they lost. They got beat up a little bit by FSU. They were in the game for 3 quarters and then let it go at the end. Came back well, focused, got their guys back in. Daniels had 5 touchdowns. And the next week, I just expect them to pour it on. They're a better team. No reason for them to hold back now. They need to lay it on the field. Under 10 points, I think, is a take as well. Lay the points, take LSU.
I agree with the guys, Ian and Trey, on the Bayou Bengals laying the 9.5. Let's go to the night game in the SEC, 7 p.m. Eastern, again on ESPN. The 2-0 Tennessee Volunteers, ranked 11 in the nation. They will invade the swamp. The Florida Gators coming in at 1-1. Week 1, they took a trip out to Salt Lake City, came away a loser. Last week, they got healthy in the swamp, a 42-point victory against McNeese State, not an SEC contender. Florida is getting 6.5 in the swamp, a total of 59. We're going to go to my Gator guy, Ian.
Yeah, this is always one of my favorite games, the Florida-Tennessee game. It just means a little bit different. It's kind of lost a little bit since the Peyton Manning days and the Steve Spurrier days, but I don't think we can ever get a point where both programs are at the top. It's been a while at least. But all right, Florida, I think we know what they are. They're an average, above average team at times. The coaching display really held them back at Utah. I really do think that if they avoided some of those mistakes that they made, just bad, like they had a penalty that gave up a 4th down, gave the ball right back with 2 guys with the same number on the field. That's not a player thing. They had 8 guys out, 9 guys out on a field goal block. That's not a player thing. They had false starts on 4th downs that cost them, and just so many little things that were not on the field. And Graham Mertz, wasn't terrible. He was actually okay. The playmakers, the running backs, did not show up week 1, but they also didn't give him the ball at all. They had less than 10 carries each, and your 2 best players, Montreal Johnson and Trevor Etienne, should never be the ones who don't touch the ball much. So what I saw them do the next week when I was watching the McNeese State game is they made a point to make sure those guys got theirs. So they made a point to make sure that Montreal Johnson got his carries, got a couple touchdowns. Trevor Etienne got his carries, got his touches, got a touchdown. Ricky Pearsall got his catches, got a touchdown. Mertz, looked comfortable in it. They went home. They got right in that game when they needed to. Now it's a big game. You're an underdog, deserved so. This line has been going around the 7, up into 7.5, down to 6.5, and fluctuating. How's the coaching staff going to respond? The only way that me as a Gator fan is going to be able to get behind Coach Napier and support the future recruiting prowess that he has shown to have for the future is to not see these mistakes on the field. These are bonehead mistakes. These are mistakes that a high school coach shouldn't be having happen. And now you're talking about it at the highest level of SEC football happening on the field. It just can't happen because the players are playing their heart out as far as the game is concerned. So you got the swamp, which is obviously going to be electric atmosphere at night. Coming off the win. The student section was great last week. They were there early on times, but that was a noted thing in the Florida blogs. You got a Tennessee team coming in with a lot of question marks. Now, they lost Hendon Hooker from last year. I think he was the glue to that offense. I think it was a perfect marriage for Coach Heupel. I don't know what Joe Milton is yet. He's been in Michigan, starter, supplanted. He was supposed to be the starter at Tennessee, supplanted. Obviously, he can throw a ball 100 yards down the field. I don't, but he could also, that also affects him. He's not the most accurate player in the world, and he has trouble getting the ball to playmakers. So where's Florida's strength lie on their defense? Sending pressure. their best defensive players, defense end, Prince. I'm sorry, I'm not going to say that. We'll call him Prince. And their defensive backs, their cornerbacks, who are their best athletes on the field. Will they be able to shut them down? No. But can they apply pressure from the inside and off the blitz? Well, they hired the Armstrong from Southern Miss to do just that, apply pressure, come off the edge, come up the middle, and try to lock these guys up man to man, which is the way that you got to play Tennessee. Put pressure on Joe Milton to make accurate passes. Can he do that? He'd never shown that he has. They had a nice win against a pretty bad Virginia team week 1. They were up and down last week. They had a win, but it wasn't an overwhelming win. I think it was an FCS opponent for Tennessee, but just another team with question marks. I think Hooker was a big part of their success last year. I don't know what they are. We're going to find out a lot about them. These games, no matter what, they tend to be close. They tend to be within a score. 7.5, you take the dog. 6.5, you probably lay it. As a fan, I'm really looking forward to this game because I want to see if Florida's coaching staff is ready. Because a year and 3 games of not being ready, that gives me a lot of questions. I don't care how good you can recruit. We've seen coaches recruit, put talent on the field, not be able to execute. They got to find a way to blend it all. Should be a good matchup. Should be a fun watch of the game. I know it's not that many primetime games this weekend, but college football, we're always going to see some action. But I do expect a close physical game, lower scoring than you would expect. I definitely would take, if I was to take one bet on this game, I would take the under. I think it's going to be a little bit lower pace, slower paced. I think you expect Florida's going to run the ball, give it to ETN, give it to Montreal Johnson, and try to let them go from that. They're going to force the ball into Milton's hands, and I don't know if that's the best thing for Tennessee.
Ian's on the under 59. Trey.
Yeah, the under, I like that as well. And I'm going to take that a little farther in terms of what Ian said, especially looking at Tennessee and quarterback Joe Milton. You just mentioned he can throw the ball 100 yards. Okay, that's great. And all of this press, when you do superhuman stuff preseason, you get a lot of publicity. And you pair that with the Tennessee hype of what that offense is like and how fast-paced it is, and it becomes a storyline in and of itself. We saw what Florida did against Utah. But when you dig deeper again, like we talked about in the first segment, this Tennessee team has not been what you think a fast-paced, big-arm quarterback has been. This is the 4th best rushing team in the country right now. 257 a game. That's not what you think about when you think about Tennessee. You think about spreading it out, throwing it all over the field, like Ian said with Hooker last year. But through 2 games, and granted, it's only 2 games, the trend has been to run the football. The reason that's important is look at Florida's defense. Yes, they lost to Utah. They gave up 3.5 yards per attempt against Utah per offensive play. The defense played well. Ian talked about the mistakes they made, but this is a very good defensive team for Florida. And I'll go to one more thing. Tennessee, you look what they did last week. Final score 30-13. I think it was Austin Peay. Let's go Peay. That score at halftime was 13-6. Now, Tennessee got it going in the second half, but I just think when we look at this, again, it's a little bit of getting fooled with hype early in the season. Florida gets that loss against Utah. What happens? Everybody writes them off. Tennessee, here come the guys from Tennessee. They're a touchdown favorite. They're spread format. It's 2023 football. It's not what it's been. It's running the football. And I think what happens here, and it lends credence to what Ian said about the under, I think this is strength versus strength in terms of Tennessee running the football and Florida defending the run, which lends itself to, like Ian said, putting it in the quarterback's hands. Now, am I that confident in Graham Mertz for Florida? I'm not. But he doesn't have to throw 5 touchdowns to win this football game. Just protect the football. It's all I'm really going to ask you to do is just protect the football. Let's keep this close, and let's win it in the fourth quarter. So I'm actually with Ian on the under, and I think a tighter game. I would take the Gators, especially if it gets up to that 7.5. I like the Gators' run defense to go against Tennessee's strength, keep them in the ball game. Want to throw a little pizza money on it, as the guys say? Do it for the outright money line win.
Great stuff, guys. Great. All right, we're going to do something a little different here. Those are our week's biggest breakdown. We are going to go in a circle here. We're each going to give 2 points, one at a time. Bring up anything you want. Teams, coaches, conferences, and the landscape of college football. Whatever's on your mind, whatever you're looking at coming into week 3. I'll go first, just because I don't want any of the 2 guys to steal my ideas, because they're way better thinkers than me. I'm going to go with the biggest game of last week was Texas at Alabama. Texas goes into Tuscaloosa and wins. Texas is now sitting at 2-0. Their biggest, toughest games left, I've circled. I think Texas has 3. Their 3 toughest games are, to me, Kansas at home, Kansas State at home, and Oklahoma in the neutral game at the Texas State Fair. If Texas doesn't make the playoffs this year, it's an epic failure. This is their year. After what they just did on the road in Alabama, the way Ewers looked at quarterback, he was hitting receivers. They really look good on D. This has got to be their year. If they're not in the Final Four, huge failure.
Yeah, I can't agree more. I think I picked them to go in the Final Four. I even think they could lose one of those games that you mentioned.
Agreed.
They'll make it, because the way that the Big 12 Conference Championship is, that they'll be able to get in and maybe even have a revenge spot against one of those 2 teams. Huge margin forever. Best team by far. I mean, they should be minus 300 to win that conference right now, and make the playoffs. Not far behind it. That's a great point, and they really need that going into the SEC next year.
Yeah, I'll echo what David said, because it was on my list here of things to talk about. But I'll go to Trey's bad picks to make the Final Four, make the college football playoff. How's that? Because 2 of my 4, I had Bama in there. Rebounding, Nick Saban was something to prove this year. Losing that game at home to Texas. Of course, Bama can rebound, but there's question marks there that we just haven't seen. There's question mark at quarterback. They've got other stuff. And I'll go to my neck of the woods in the ACC. Clemson getting beat by Duke in week 1. Now, people looked at that score 28-7 and said, man, Duke throttled Clemson. They did not. Clemson made turnover after turnover, bad mistakes, 2 inside the red zone. But this Clemson team, they rebounded last week. There's questions there. Even as good as Klubnik can be at quarterback, I watched week 1. They brought in Riley from TCU, and that offense still looked like the offense for Clemson from last year. A lot of horizontal stuff, not down the field. So one of the storylines for me is in week 2, teams that a lot of people picked to get in that college football playoff didn't wait till later to lose in a big matchup. Alabama lost in a big matchup, but Clemson lost right out of the gate. And they've got no choice now but to run the table. And you've got Florida State out there, an ACC championship game that is not division determined. It's 2 best records. I mean, they're on notice now each and every week. And you could see a team in the ACC, a Duke, a North Carolina, waltz in to that ACC championship game by playing a lesser schedule.
Absolutely. And we talked about the big slate next week. Florida State heads to Clemson next week. So we'll be previewing that one. And that's a great point by Trey there. My last point. It might be dying, but currently it is thriving. Pac-12 football. This might be as good as the Pac-12 has looked in literally 20 or 30 years. It's incredible that this is all about to come down, as they have never looked this good. 8 teams in the top 25 this week. Heisman Trophy winner, and he looks like he wants to win it again, Caleb Williams at USC. Coach Prime, everyone knows what's going on in Colorado. Boulder's going nuts over Neon Dion. And how about the quarterbacks in this conference? To name a few, Bo Nix at Oregon, Cam Rising about to come back for Utah. DJ Ugalele at Oregon State. Shedeur Sanders, we just mentioned Prime's son playing quarterback at Boulder. Michael Penix Jr. up in Washington, looks as good as maybe anyone in the country so far. And last, Cam Ward at Wazoo up in the Palouse, knocked off everyone like Wisconsin last week. Cam Ward said, we're going to take this team down, and they outplayed Wisconsin in every aspect of that game. The Pac-12, impressive, off to an impressive start at least.
Hey, David, it's a good thing you went before me because that was my point. Pac-12 is the best conference in football right now, the deepest conference. And I say that being with a school of the SEC. There's just from top to bottom, you said it, the quarterbacks, and one name I'll throw in there too, Dante Moore, 5-star freshman from UCLA, finally took over that starting job last week. So much more talented than everybody else. Once he knows he has the reins, that team is going to be getting better and better throughout the year. But you're looking at Heisman finalists potentially early on right now as we sit back. You know, you mentioned basically all of them. The only people I could think of outside of right now that are actually in that conversation are Jordan Travis and Sam Hartman. Because if you're going to give me a finalist right now, of course, Caleb Williams, Shedeur Sanders, Michael Penix, Bo Nix, that's the prime quarterbacks of college football, and they're all sitting in the same conference. They're going to be playing each other. That's what I worry about if we actually get to find a team actually make the playoffs this year because of they're going to be knocking each other out. But Pac-12 is incredible. Oregon State is looking dominant in the first couple games. You know, USC cannot be stopped. They put up 49 points in the first half against Stanford. The Bo Nix was able to, lead that team. Tough game at Texas Tech, able to find a way. You mentioned Washington State.
Tough environment. That was a good win.
Washington State able to pull off that win over Wisconsin. I mean, that not only are they playing, but they're picking off wins. Even Colorado beating TCU.
Really?
Utah traveling down to Baylor last week, pulling out that win from behind. Cam Rising coming back there. Colorado, people talk about, of course, we have to talk about Colorado. They got talent. I don't know. I think it might tail off because their top 11 is as talented as everybody else. Shedeur Sanders at a high school. Yeah, he came from Jackson State. But this guy was getting offers from Alabama, Georgia, Ohio State. He was getting offers from everybody. Travis Hunter was the number 1 recruit in the country. Can't forget that. These guys are talented. I don't know if the depth will hold up in the second half of the season. We'll see when they start getting into conference play. But yeah, Michael Penix in Washington, that might be the best team in the Pac-12. They got NFL receivers, NFL quarterback. They are just loaded. A great coach. You said it so well. Pac-12, deepest conference early on right now. They're the only team to go undefeated in week 1. Only conference to go undefeated. All games week 1. Amazing start for them. Last year, the Pac-12.
David, I'll make this quick because I agree with all of that. I would just go to 2 things. The biggest change we were all waiting to see how it would affect games and scores, the clock. Yeah. Clock not stopping on first downs unless we're inside that 2 minutes in the first half of the game. Being at a game in person, it's funny, man. You don't take notice of it because of the game flow until you look up and you're halfway through the first quarter. There is a noticeable difference when you're watching it now. On the flip side of that, every TV timeout seems like it's 22 minutes long. But
literally,
there is a noticeable difference in the flow of the game. And I think the scores are down a little bit. We just talked about 2 games today that both we think can go under. This clock does make a difference. It is absolutely playing a part. And you look at some of these teams like Tennessee who are running the ball a lot more, that clock keeps churning. And as this season goes along, teams are going to shorten games, especially underdogs. And these first downs and the clock's not stopping, it's going to become more of a factor. And the last point I'll make, and this is a little bit of a homer issue, but I'm going to throw it out there anyway because of things that stand out. It's been one of the biggest stories in the country. The NCAA and their decision-making process still sucks out loud. And I'll just stop right there.
Stinks. They're ruining kids' lives. No, it's right. That's not even a homer. That's everyone across they're ruining kids' lives. They're ruining families. They're taking away eligibility over silly, ridiculous things. It's time for them to figure out what's going on and make the right decisions for the kids.
Well, and in the end, and we talked a little bit about this week one, with what's going to happen because of this, teams leaving the ACC, for example, and other conferences, the days of the NCAA are numbered. It's just a matter of years or how long we get there, but especially when something like this happens, because you're going to see a lawsuit here. Make no mistake about it. It may not affect him this year, but this has the potential to be a landmark case, and it could be the end of the NCAA long term.
Yeah, something's got.
If you didn't hear about it, go listen to Mac Brown. What he put a tweet out last week, and I was right with him. I know he was going scorched earth, but I was right with him. I'm not a Carolina fan. They are really, really not thinking the NCAA. It's awful. Ian?
Yeah, no, there's no consistency at all. And this stems back to even pre-COVID. I know everyone got the extra year. We're kind of getting to the end of that extra year, but with the transfer portal being as it is, it's kind of run rampant, out of control. But you can't have rules for one person and have different rules for the other. And it was the same way it was. There was never any consistency. And it just doesn't level the playing field at all. Because if you're going to tell one kid one thing based on something, tell another kid something else, it ruins their lives, because they're making decisions based for their futures, for their livelihood. Yep. And they are student athletes, and they need to find a way to make it right. And that's something academics hampered Cal and Stanford from this conference talk, because ultimately they couldn't follow suit with their other West Coast teams. Stanford being the deepest, one of the most important athletic programs for the Team USA Olympic team.
Yeah.
And they're struggling to find a conference because their academic standards are there. We don't see it in football and basketball as much, but it could really be a big deal when we are looking at the Summer Olympic Games in a couple of years, and we see less development in some of those other sports that we're used to dominating, seeing gold medals in. So, this is all NCAA issues because there's just not consistency about it.
Good point.
It's a problem. It's a big problem. And this still goes beyond like Clemson coach Davos when he refusing to use the portal. This has nothing to do with that. This is institutional issues with governing body issues, with inconsistencies about it. Schools can have their policies, and they stick to their policies. That's fine. The governing bodies should also have policies and stick to them. And it's either say one thing or the other, not one thing for this kid, one thing for that kid, another thing for that kid. Just stick to it.
Absolutely. Right on, guys. Once again, this is the Line Movers Network College Football Podcast. Make sure you find us again right here next week. The slate is absolutely incredible. One more thing. Do not miss a podcast, The Edge of It All, featuring Trey Edge. His guests are absolutely incredible. It's not just about sports, but it's about life and how you go about it. And it really is fantastic. You can find it wherever you download your podcasts. For David Dorman, Ian Robbins, Trey Edge, I'm going to say goodbye. You guys finish us off.
Hey, good luck with your plays this week. It might not be a loaded slate on paper, but we know it's college football. Anything's going to happen. Expect the unexpected this weekend.
And we are due for some upsets. Let's see them start this weekend.